Hello and welcome to this episode of Beyond the Rails. We're going to take a closer look at the Nashville National Cemetery today. So please join us as we enter the front gates, as we take a tour of the cemetery. We're going to profile some of the honored service members who are buried here, and also talk a little bit about the history of the cemetery and why it was placed in this location along the railroad tracks that are now operated by CSX. The first thing you notice as we enter the grounds is the monumental Masonry Archway that is at the front of the cemetery. 5 of these were built in national cemeteries in the South. This is the oldest one. The others are in Marietta, Georgia, and Chattanooga, Tennessee, as well as Vicksburg National Cemetery and Arlington National Cemetery. At one time, there was an unsubstantiated rumor that there were 3 Union soldiers entombed at the top of the archway, but there has never been any evidence to support that claim. Tennessee was among the last states to secede from the Union and one of the first reoccupied by U.S. forces. After the Union Army took over Nashville in February of 1862, the city became a vital supply depot and hospital center. In December of 1864, the Confederates attempted to retake the city. Union Commander General George H. Thomas prepared and waited his hood encircled the city, and on December 15th he attacked, but darkness ended the fighting. The next day, Union soldiers assaulted Overton and Shies Hills, routing the Confederates and ending the Battle of Nashville. General Thomas chose a site on the battlefield marked by a hill to bury the more than 2,000 Union dead. He chose this site, with the railroads bisecting it, and said that no one could come to Nashville from the north and not be reminded of the sacrifices that had been made for the preservation of the Union. The War Department renamed the 64-acre site the Nashville National Cemetery in 1866. Original internments were the remains of soldiers removed from temporary burial grounds around Nashville's general hospitals, as well as the Civil War battlefields at Franklin, Gallatin, Tennessee, and Bowling Green and Cave City, Kentucky. Because a couple of years had passed since the end of the war, several of the graves were unknown soldiers. There were 4,141 unknowns interred at the cemetery. The stone wall that surrounds the cemetery and the limestone archway were both constructed in 1870. The present lodge, that you'll see in a second, was the third constructed at the cemetery, built near the site of the original lodge, and was completed in 1931. They've also added some new internment ceremony shelters, as well as a mausoleum on the grounds, and have recently begun reinterring soldiers and veterans into the cemetery. For a time they had stopped as they had run out of space. Obviously, with the train tracks that come straight through the cemetery, it's a well-known railfan hotspot in the city of Nashville. This is the northern part of the Nashville terminal. It intersects with the Henderson and Mainline subdivisions just north of the cemetery at Amkey. And all trains coming in from the north have to come through here, so it gets quite a bit of traffic. While many of us often spend time here enjoying the rails, you're surrounded by a really serene setting and thousands upon thousands of heroes of our country. As this train comes through, we'll take a few moments to profile some of those veterans and the heroes that are buried here in this cemetery, as well as some that are more well-known in popular culture. We'll begin with profiles of the 3 Congressional Medal of Honor winners that are buried here at the cemetery. This is Corporal John Carr, a Congressional Medal of Honor winner from the Indian Wars. He was born in 1847 in Columbus, Ohio, and was a private in Company G of the 8th U.S. Cavalry. Fighting in Arizona on October 29, 1869, he displayed heroism while engaging a raiding band of hostile Apache Indians. For gallantry in action, he was promoted to corporal and awarded the Medal of Honor. And here we have Sergeant Charles P. Cantrell, a Congressional Medal of Honor winner from the Spanish-American War. He served in the United States Army during the war with Spain as a sergeant in Company F of the 10th U.S. Infantry. He was one of 5 members of Company F awarded the Medal of Honor for their bravery at Santiago de Cuba on July 1, 1898, with the citation reading, "Gallantly assisted in the rescue of the wounded from in front of the lines and under heavy fire of the enemy." And this is Corporal William Franklin Lyle, a Congressional Medal of Honor winner from the Korean War, He was born in Hickman, Tennessee, and served as a corporal in Company F of the 17th Infantry Regiment. In his actions in Korea on August 31st, 1951, he was leading a platoon when they came under heavy fire from enemy bunker positions. Seizing a rifle, he moved ahead to a firing position and completely destroyed an enemy bunker, then returned to his platoon and was resuming the assault when his unit was again subjected to fire from 2 enemy bunkers. Armed with grenades, he charged forward, hurling grenades into one of the enemy emplacements, and even though he was wounded, he pressed on, destroying the bunker and killing 6 of the enemy. He then continued his attack against a 3rd enemy position, throwing grenades as he ran forward, annihilating 4 enemy soldiers. He then led his platoon to the north slope of the hill, from which effective fire was delivered against the enemy in support of friendly troops moving up. Exposing himself to enemy fire, he continuously moved about, directing and encouraging his men until he was mortally wounded by enemy mortar fire. For conspicuous gallantry, he was posthumously awarded the Medal of Honor on January 9, 1953. What an amazing contribution to our country each of those 3 men had. Next up, we'll profile a few graves that are of the Civil War era. Here we have Colonel Edward S. Jones. He was commissioned as captain and commander of Company C of the 3rd Pennsylvania Volunteer Cavalry on August 1st, 1861. He was promoted to lieutenant colonel on November 20th, 1862, and eventually assumed command of the regiment and led it until his enlistment expired, and he was honorably mustered on August 24th, 1864. He had received a commission of colonel, but it was not acted upon before he left the service. After his service, he originated the George H. Thomas Post No. 1 in Nashville, and was the founder and commander of the Tennessee and Georgia Grand Army of the Republic groups. Here we have Colonel James W. Lawless. He was born in Ireland in 1832, and he came to America at the age of 16 in 1848. He served during the Civil War as colonel and commander of the 7th Kentucky Volunteer Cavalry. This is Chaplain Erastus Milo Kravith. He was born in 1833 in Homer, New York. His father was one of 3 men to form an abolition party in Homer, and used the house as a station on the Underground Railroad. As a boy, he grew up in a household devoted to the cause and aiding refugee slaves. He went on to study at Oberlin College. He joined the Union Army in December of 1863, served through the end of the war, including campaigns in Franklin and Nashville, Tennessee. In October of 1865, he returned to Nashville and became a field agent for the American Missionary Association, and founded Fisk School in 1866. Within the first 6 months, the school had climbed from 200 to 900 students, and using Fisk as his base, he started several freedmen schools in cities in Tennessee and Georgia. In 1875, he returned to Fisk University as the president, spent the next 3 years touring abroad with the Fisk Jubilee Singers to raise funds for the college, and then led the university for more than 20 years. Here we have Major Augustus Hermann Pettibone. He had graduated the University of Michigan in 1859, having studied law. He joined the Union Army at the beginning of the Civil War and rose to the rank of major in the 12th Regiment. After the war, he continued to practice law and became Attorney General for the First Judicial Court of Tennessee, and was eventually elected to Congress, serving in the 47th, 48th, and 49th Congress as a Republican, served until 1887. Next up, we'll have some people who were either born on or perished on significant dates in the history of our country, significantly World War II, as well as the story of the flight crew of a plane that exploded over England. In my research of the cemetery, one of the things I wanted to discover was who was the earliest born person buried at the cemetery. And here we have Mr. Anderson Shelton, who was born in 1780 in Virginia. He was married in 1805 and had 8 children, and passed away in 1865. From what I've found, there are several non-military citizens who were buried in the cemetery, and Mr. Shelton is one of those. I also researched to see if anyone had perished at Pearl Harbor. I found that Private Leland V. Beasley died on December 7, 1941 at Hickman Field, where he was killed when the Japanese attacked the island. He was one of 9 casualties from a squadron and one of 2,403 servicemen killed in the attack. The December 12, 1941 edition of the Tennessean declared that he was the state's first war casualty. His body was initially interred near Pearl Harbor, but in 1947 his remains were moved to the Nashville National Cemetery. After discovering Private Beasley, I also was curious if anyone in the cemetery was born on Pearl Harbor Day. discovered Sergeant Joseph Williams Crosby, Jr., was born on December 7th, 1941, went on to serve in Vietnam, and passed away in 2006. I then researched if anyone in the cemetery had perished on D-Day and was able to find Private Sidney Berry. He was a member of the 82nd Airborne 505th Parachute Infantry Regiment, Company G. He died in Normandy on June 6, 1944. In researching if anyone had perished at D-Day, I also found an entry for June 8th of 1944, so researched that to see the story there. This is a very interesting story. This is a grave with 9 members of the crew of B-17 Double Trouble. It was in a mid-air explosion over England. The members of the flight crew were initially interred near the squadron cemetery in Cambridge, England. Their remains were returned to the United States and buried in a single bronze casket shrouded in the U.S. flag. None of the victims were from Tennessee. Their families chose Nashville from a list of burial locations supplied from the government. Interesting in this story is that the plane had gone up for a mission with a full load of armament, and the mission was scrubbed, so they asked to stay in the air and do navigation practice. It's never been determined what caused the accident. They know that the plane struck the ground and then hopped back up in the air, and at some point a resulting fire caused the bombs to explode on the plane. Also, in researching, I found the flight records and the letters from the group that did the accident investigation. Interestingly, there is a 10th member of the flight crew who is listed as perishing in the accident, but he is not listed on the marker of this grave. I've tried to research what might have happened to his remains, and I have not been able to find any conclusive information at all. And for our final set of profiles, we'll feature a few members of the music scene, which is not surprising since this cemetery is here in Nashville, as well as a Major League Baseball pitcher. This is Private James Sweeney, Jr. He fought in World War II. He was a veteran of the Nashville African-American music scene, singer-songwriter and a self-taught guitarist. As a pop singer, he was known professionally as Jimmy Sweeney, and also known as Jimmy Bell. His recordings span country, rhythm and blues, soul, and doo-wop, and he was an early influencer of Elvis Presley. Here we have Corporal Virgil D. Wilburn and Sergeant First Class Thurman Theodore Wilburn. They served together in the Korean War. They are better known as Doyle and Teddy Wilburn. They're brothers who formed one of the most popular country music duos of all time. After serving in Korea, they formed a duo in 1953, joining the Opry. Had several top hits. They're also credited for discovering Loretta Lynn and launched the singing careers of Patti Loveless, Sonny James, the Osborne Brothers, and many others. They had a lifetime recording contract with Decca Records, and they performed regularly on the Opry until Doyle's death in 1982. Teddy continued as a solo artist on the Opry until his health declined, and in 2008 they were inducted posthumously into the Arkansas Entertainers Hall of Fame. Here we have technician 5th grade James U. Willis, who served in World War II. He's better known as Guy Willis, a member of the Willis Brothers Country Music Ensemble. They performed many hits as well as featured in several movies. In 1964, they released their single Give Me 40 Acres to Turn This Rig Around, which is their top 10 country hit and a trucker anthem still to this day. And here we have the grave for Staff Sergeant Barry Sadler. In 1958, he initially enlisted in the U.S. Air Force as a radar specialist, but discharged 1 year later to begin touring and playing music. He eventually re-enlisted in the U.S. Army as an airborne paratrooper. He was in Vietnam in May of 1965 when he was wounded, and while recovering from that, he would record his only #1 hit song, The Ballad of the Green Berets. It was originally released in early 1966. He was never able to recapture that commercial success, and after he left the Army, he wound up living in Guatemala, where on September 8th of 1989, he was shot riding in a taxi. The cause of that shooting remains unknown to this day, but he was moved back to the States, and a few months later passed away from his wounds at the VA hospital in Murfreesboro. And here we have Private First Class Robert D. Schultz. He served in World War II. Had the nickname Bullet Bob as a pitcher who began his baseball career in 1946 after leaving the service. Played several seasons in the minor leagues, including a season in Nashville where he went 25-6 with a 2.68 ERA. He played several major league seasons, was involved in a large trade, including a couple of Hall of Famers. He ended his big league career in 1955. Unfortunately, he passed away in 1979 when he was gunned down at a VFW post in Nashville. So you found this short film interesting, as well as maybe learned something from it, and maybe it's piqued your interest so that next time, if you are a rail fan that goes out to the cemetery, you can do a little bit of looking around yourself. I used the website findagrave.com for a lot of the research that I did, as well as their phone app. Within the phone app, it has GPS coordinates so that you can easily find graves that you might be looking for. Of the profiles we did, about half of them had the GPS coordinates in, and about half did not, so we had to track them down. But while doing so, we entered those GPS coordinates ourselves into the app. So if you ever want to go and visit any of the ones we profiled, those coordinates should be available to you. Again, hope you've enjoyed this and look forward to seeing you on down the line. Thanks for watching this video. I really hope you enjoyed it. If you did, click on the thumbs up below to give us a like. Also, please click on the Rusty Boxcar logo on the right side of the screen to get a subscription to the channel. And send us a comment. Really enjoy reading all your comments, and I try to respond to each one of them. Thanks, and have a nice day.